Henry Whitlow had always been good with numbers. So when he counted the exact 17 thrusts coming from his bedroom upstairs, he knew his marriage was over. The creaking floorboards above the kitchen table where he sat with his severance papers told him everything he needed to know about timing, rhythm, and betrayal. He'd come home early from his final meeting at Morrison Auto Parts, where they'd handed him a check for 22 years of service and a cardboard box of personal items. The house had been too quiet when he walked in. His wife Clarice's car was in the driveway next to a silver BMW he didn't recognize. Now, sitting in his own kitchen at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, Henry Whitlow, mild-mannered accountant, faithful husband, devoted father, listened to his wife having closeness with another man and felt something cold settle in his chest where his heart used to be. The sound stopped. Water ran in the upstairs bathroom. Henry folded his severance papers neatly, placed them in the center of the kitchen table, and walked upstairs. He found them in his bed. His wife of 23 years, without clothes and flushed, scrambling for the sheets. The man was older than Henry expected, maybe 47, with silver hair and expensive cologne that now contaminated Henry's bedroom. "Henry!" Clarice screamed. "You're supposed to be at work." The man, tall, confident, even while without clothes, didn't scramble. He stood up slowly, reaching for his pants. "You must be the husband. I'm Darren Marin." Henry had imagined this moment before, the way most married men do in idle moments. He'd always pictured himself yelling, crying, maybe throwing a punch. Instead, he felt perfectly calm. "Get out of my house," Henry said quietly. "Henry, we need to talk," Clarice started, but Henry held up his hand. "Get out of my house." Darren was buttoning his shirt, taking his time. "Look, pal, these things happen. We're all adults here." That's when Henry snapped. He'd been lifting auto parts for 22 years. His hands were calloused, his arms stronger than they looked. When he grabbed Darren by the throat and slammed him against the bedroom wall, the man's confident smile disappeared. "Henry, stop." Clarice was screaming, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Henry's fist connected with Darren's nose, then his cheekbone, then his jaw. Red droplets splattered across the family photos on Henry's dresser. Pictures of Sophie's graduation, their anniversary dinner, Christmas mornings. When Darren finally fell, Henry kept hitting. He hit him for 22 years of marriage. For paying Sophie's college tuition while Clarice spent money on new clothes. For every time Clarice had called him boring, unambitious, not enough. "You're killing him." Clarice was pulling at Henry's arm. Henry stopped. Darren's face was unrecognizable. His breathing was shallow but steady. Henry stood up, his knuckles split and bleeding. He looked at his wife cowering in the corner with a bedsheet wrapped around her, and felt nothing. "Call an ambulance," he said, and walked downstairs. The police came 20 minutes later. Officer Martinez, a kid Henry recognized from the neighborhood, looked uncomfortable taking the statement. "Mr. Whitlow, Mr. Marin says he doesn't want to press charges. Says it was a misunderstanding." Henry almost laughed. Even bruised and broken, Darren was defending himself. A man doesn't press charges against a husband when he's been caught in the husband's bed. "What about your wife's statement?" Martinez asked. "What did she say?" "That you've been acting unstable since you lost your job, drinking, talking to yourself. She's concerned about your mental state." Henry nodded. Of course she was. That night, alone in his garage while Clarice stayed at her sister's, Henry received a text from his daughter Sophie. She was a junior at Butler University, studying marketing with his money, his sacrifices. The text said, "You're not my dad anymore. Mom's boyfriend is taking care of us now. I'm changing my name to Marin. Don't contact me again." Then she blocked his number. Henry stared at the message for a long time. Then he walked to the workbench where he kept his tools. Tools he'd been collecting for 20 years. Tools he'd used to fix everything in this house. Tools that had built the life that was now crumbling around him. He picked up a wrench, tested its weight in his hand, and smiled. The next morning, divorce papers arrived by courier. Clarice wanted half of everything, including his pension. She wanted the house. She wanted alimony. She wanted him gone. Henry signed them without reading and mailed them back the same day. 3 weeks later, he met Marcia Marin at a diner on the south side of town. She was Darren's ex-wife. A woman with sharp eyes and graying hair who'd lost everything when Darren left her for his secretary 2 years ago. "You're the one who rearranged my ex-husband's face," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "He got better. Unfortunately." Marcia stirred her coffee, studying Henry. "Clarice thinks you're crazy. Dangerous." What do you think? I think you're the first person in years who made Darren Marin feel pain. She leaned forward. And I think we should be friends. Henry had been living alone for a month by then. His beard had grown wild. His clothes hung loose from not eating. People crossed the street when they saw him, but Marcia Marin looked at him like he was exactly what she'd been waiting for. What did you have in mind? Henry asked. Marcia smiled, and Henry saw his own rage reflected in her eyes. I want to watch him burn, she said, slowly. That was the beginning of Henry's education in revenge. Marcia taught him patience. Darren owned 3 real estate offices in town and had city council connections. He drove a BMW, lived in a house on the lake, and treated people like disposable things. But he also cut corners, bent rules, and made enemies. The key, Marcia explained over dinner at her small apartment, is to let him destroy himself. We just help things along. Henry learned that Darren had been skimming from property management accounts for years, small amounts, cleverly hidden. But Henry was an accountant. He knew how to follow money trails. How do we prove it? Henry asked. We don't prove it, we make it impossible to hide. That's when Henry met Lacey Thorne, a librarian at the public library who looked like a soccer mom, but could hack into systems like she'd written the code herself. Marcia had dated Lacey's brother years ago, and Lacey owed Marcia a favor. What exactly do you want me to do? Lacey asked, her fingers already dancing across her laptop keyboard. Darren's property management software, Henry said. It handles rent collection, maintenance scheduling, financial reporting. If it crashed during an audit, the city would have to examine all the books manually, Lacey finished, and any discrepancies would be obvious. Can you do it? Lacey grinned. I can make it look like Chinese hackers did it. While Lacey worked her digital magic, Henry and Marcia handled the human element. Marcia seduced Jim Walsh, the city auditor, a lonely man who'd been divorced for 3 years and was desperate for attention. Within 2 weeks, Jim was sharing city business over pillow talk. Darren's up for a big zoning variance next month, Marcia reported. Wants to build condos on the old factory site. If that goes through, he makes millions. What if it doesn't go through? Henry asked. He's already borrowed against the projected profits. If the deal falls apart, he loses everything. Henry felt that cold smile spreading across his face again. Then we make sure it falls apart. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Henry used his accounting skills to create a series of dummy charities, organizations that existed only on paper, but looked legitimate enough to fool casual inspection. Each charity siphoned small amounts from Darren's various accounts. $50 here, $100 there. Nothing that would trigger automatic fraud alerts, but enough to create a pattern. Meanwhile, Lacey's virus slowly corrupted Darren's property management system. Files disappeared. Reports showed impossible numbers. The software crashed during the busiest part of the month, when rent was due and maintenance requests were flooding in. When the city audit began, they found a mess. Missing funds, doctored reports, and a zoning application that seemed to violate 3 different environmental regulations. He's going to fight this, Marcia warned. Darren doesn't go down easy. She was right. 2 weeks after the audit began, Henry was working late in his garage when he heard cars pull up outside. Through the window, he saw 3 men getting out of a black SUV. They moved like professionals, not cops, but not amateurs either. Henry had been preparing for this moment. He'd spent hours in the garage, not just planning, but building. The workbench that had once held weekend projects now held very different tools. The first man through the garage door was big, probably used to intimidating people through size alone. He didn't expect Henry to be waiting behind the door with a tire iron. The blow caught him across the temple, dropping him immediately. The second man reached for something under his jacket, but Henry was already moving. 22 years of lifting auto parts had given him speed as well as strength. The fight lasted 3 minutes. When it was over, 2 men were unconscious on his garage floor, and the third was handcuffed to the hydraulic jack, begging Henry not to call the police. Who sent you? Henry asked calmly, testing the weight of a socket wrench in his hand. Darren Marin. He just wanted us to scare you, man. That's all, just scare you off. Henry nodded thoughtfully. Then he pulled out his phone and started recording. Tell me about Darren's other business interests, Henry said. The ones the city doesn't know about. 20 minutes later, Henry had enough information to destroy Darren 10 times over. Pills money laundering through property purchases, bribes to city officials, extortion schemes targeting small business owners. Henry uploaded the recordings to a secure server, sent copies to Marcia and Lacey, and called the police to report a break-in. When the cops arrived, they found 3 men tied up in Henry's garage, all of them with outstanding warrants. Henry was sitting calmly at his workbench, reading a book. They came to rob me, Henry explained. I defended myself. The next day, Judge Leo Croft, an old family friend who'd officiated Henry's wedding, called him personally. Henry, I need to see you. There are things we need to discuss. They met at Leo's chambers after hours. The judge looked 10 years older than the last time Henry had seen him. The divorce proceedings, Leo began carefully. There might be delays. Oh? Evidence has come to light about Clarice's financial entanglements with Mr. Marin. The court needs to investigate before dividing assets. Henry waited. There's also the matter of certain recordings that have surfaced. Recordings that could be embarrassing to several people. Including you? Henry asked quietly. Leo's face went pale. How did you... I'm an accountant, Leo. I noticed patterns. Your lunch meetings with Clarice started 3 months before she met Darren. Your credit card statements show hotel charges that don't match your court schedule. Should I continue? The judge stared at him for a long moment. What do you want, Henry? I want my divorce delayed until Darren's assets are frozen. I want the investigation into his businesses to continue without interference. And I want my wife to understand that her choices have consequences. And the recordings? Stay private, as long as everyone plays by the new rules. Leo nodded slowly. You've changed, Henry. You're not the man I married 23 years ago. No, Henry agreed. I'm not. That weekend, Henry drove past Clarice's sister's house and saw moving trucks in the driveway. His wife was loading boxes, her face drawn and tired. She'd lost weight and her hair looked like she'd cut it herself. She saw him watching and walked over to his car. Henry, we need to talk. Do we? I know what you're doing. The business with Darren, the delayed divorce. This has to stop. Henry looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was still beautiful, but there was something desperate in her eyes now. Where's Sophie? He asked. She's busy with school. Is she? Or is she busy with her new father? Clarice's face crumpled. She's confused, Henry. She'll come around. Will she? Henry put the car in drive. I guess we'll see. 3 months later, Henry's revenge reached its crescendo. Darren's real estate empire collapsed when the city froze all his assets pending a federal investigation. The FBI had gotten involved after anonymous tips about money laundering and corruption. Clarice lost her job when the real estate office closed. She moved from her sister's house to a small apartment, then to a trailer park on the edge of town. Every week, she looked a little more broken. But Sophie stayed away. Even when her mother needed help. Even when Darren disappeared entirely, fled to Mexico, according to rumors, Sophie maintained her silence. Henry had almost forgotten about his daughter when she appeared on his doorstep one evening in December. 3 years had passed since she'd blocked his number, and she looked different. Older, harder, but also somehow fragile. Dad, she said, and the word hung in the cold air between them. Henry looked at her through the screen door. Behind him, Valerie moved in the kitchen, a woman 10 years younger than Clarice, with kind eyes and steady hands, who'd been living with Henry for 6 months now. I'm sorry, Henry said. Do I know you? Sophie's face went white. Dad, it's me. It's Sophie. Sophie Whitlow passed away 3 years ago, Henry said calmly. She sent me a text to let me know. Please, Dad. I need help. That's when Henry noticed the slight swell of her belly beneath her coat. Whose baby? He asked. Marcus Rivera's, Valerie's son. Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. Henry felt the last piece of his revenge falling into place. He looked past Sophie to the young man sitting in the car behind her. Marcus, who'd been dealing pills for Darren before the empire collapsed, who'd gotten Sophie pregnant and then gotten arrested for possession with intent to distribute. And what exactly do you need help with, Sophie Marin? She flinched at the name. The baby. There are complications, medical bills. Marcus is in jail, and I can't do this alone. Why don't you ask your new father for help? Darren's gone. He left the country. Mom's living in a trailer. There's nobody else. Henry nodded slowly. So you come to the man you disowned. The man you said wasn't your father. I was wrong. I was young and stupid and... You were 20 years old, Henry interrupted. Old enough to make choices. Old enough to live with consequences. Valerie appeared at Henry's shoulder, her hand gentle on his arm. She looked at Sophie with something that might have been pity. Come inside, Valerie said. It's cold. They sat in Henry's living room. The same room where Sophie had opened Christmas presents for 18 years, where she'd brought report cards and prom dates and college acceptance letters. Now she sat on the edge of the couch like a stranger, her hands folded over her belly. "The baby has a heart defect," Sophie said. "Surgery costs $200,000. Insurance won't cover it all." "And you want me to pay for it," Henry said. "You're my father." "Am I? Because 3 years ago you told me very clearly that I wasn't. You changed your name, you chose a new family. You made your decision." Sophie started crying then, not the pretty tears of a girl used to getting her way, but the raw, desperate sobs of someone who'd run out of options. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "I was angry about the divorce and angry at you for hitting Darren, angry at everything. I thought he'd take care of us. And instead, he took care of himself." "Yes." Henry leaned back in his chair, studying his daughter. She looked so much like Clarice had at that age, before the years hardened her, before the affair, before the betrayal. "Tell me about Marcus," Henry said. Sophie wiped her eyes. He made some bad choices. Got involved with pills when his dad passed. Darren used him as a runner, promised him easy money. And now he's in prison. For 3 years, maybe more. Leaving you alone with a sick baby and no money. Sophie nodded miserably. Henry stood up and walked to the window. Snow was falling outside, covering the driveway where Clarice used to park her car, where Sophie used to ride her bicycle in circles. "I could help you," Henry said finally. Sophie looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "But I won't." The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. "Dad, you made your choice 3 years ago. You chose Darren Marin as your father. You chose to cut me out of your life completely. You chose to believe your mother's lies about my mental state, my drinking, my instability." Henry turned to face her. "Now you live with that choice. But the baby is not my grandchild. According to you, I'm not your father. So that baby is no relation to me at all." Valerie was watching Henry with careful eyes. She knew what he was capable of now, knew how far he'd gone to destroy the people who'd betrayed him. But she also knew the man beneath the monster. The man who still kept Sophie's childhood photos in his wallet, who still made her favorite cookies at Christmas, even though she wasn't there to eat them. "The door is right behind you," Henry said to Sophie. "Same door you walked out of 3 years ago." Sophie struggled to her feet, her pregnancy making her clumsy. At the door, she turned back one more time. "What happened to you?" she whispered. "You used to be kind." Henry smiled, that cold smile that had become his signature. "I learned to be practical, just like you did." After Sophie left, Henry and Valerie sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Valerie spoke. "Are you going to help her?" "Should I?" "She's your daughter." "Is she?" Henry's voice was tired now, the energy drained out of him. "Because daughters don't disown their fathers. Daughters don't change their names and block phone numbers and choose new families." She was hurt, confused. She was 20 years old, not 12. She made an adult decision. Henry looked at Valerie. "Would you help Marcus if he came to you now, after everything he's done?" Valerie was quiet for a moment. Her son had broken her heart repeatedly, stealing from her, lying to her, choosing pills and crime over family. She'd tried everything to save him, and he'd thrown it all away. "No," she admitted, "I wouldn't." "Then you understand." But Henry didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed next to Valerie, staring at the ceiling, thinking about a little girl who used to climb into this same bed on Saturday mornings. He used to fall asleep watching movies with her head on his shoulder. By morning, he'd made his decision. The confrontation happened at the Riverside Country Club, at the annual Chamber of Commerce fundraiser. Henry had been watching Clarice for weeks, tracking her movements, waiting for the right moment. She was waitressing at the event, serving drinks to the same people who used to invite her to their dinner parties. Her uniform was too big. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes. Henry walked into the ballroom at 9 p.m., wearing his best suit and carrying a briefcase. People turned to stare, some with curiosity, some with fear. His reputation had grown over the past 3 years. He was no longer the mild accountant who'd gotten fired from Morrison Auto Parts. Now he was the man who'd destroyed Darren Marin, who'd bankrupted a real estate empire, who'd made powerful people very afraid. Clarice saw him coming and dropped the tray she was holding. Glasses shattered on the polished floor, wine spreading across the marble. "Hello, Clarice," Henry said. "What are you doing here?" "I came to make an announcement." Henry walked to the front of the room, where Mayor Davidson was preparing to give his speech. The crowd fell silent as Henry approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, Henry said into the microphone, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "I have something to share with you." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a tablet computer. With a few taps, he connected it to the room's projection system. 3 years ago, my wife had an affair with Darren Marin. When I caught them together, I beat him nearly to death. You all remember that. It was quite the scandal. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Security guards were moving closer, but Henry held up his hand. What you didn't know is that Darren had affairs with several other women in this town. Married women, prominent women, and he filmed them. The first video appeared on the screen, grainy security footage from what looked like a hotel room. The crowd gasped as they recognized the participants. "Judge Leo Croft's wife, Patricia," Henry announced calmly. "This was filmed 18 months ago at the Marriott downtown." The mayor tried to grab the microphone, but Henry was faster. The second video replaced the first. "City Councilwoman Janet Torres. This one was filmed in Darren's office." Chaos erupted in the ballroom. People were shouting, trying to leave, trying to stop Henry. But he kept talking, his voice cutting through the noise. "Mrs. Davidson, our mayor's wife. This was filmed at the lake house." Security finally reached him, but Henry was already packing up his equipment. He'd said what he came to say, shown what he came to show. As they dragged him toward the exit, Henry saw Clarice in the crowd. She was crying, her hands over her face, the full weight of her choices finally crushing down on her. "This is what betrayal costs," Henry called out to her. "This is what happens when you choose the wrong side." The police arrested Henry that night, but the charges didn't stick. The videos were authentic, obtained through legal channels during the federal investigation into Darren's activities. Publishing them might have been cruel, but it wasn't illegal. The real damage was social. By morning, everyone in town knew that their most prominent citizens had been sleeping with a criminal. The mayor resigned. Judge Croft took early retirement. 3 city council members stepped down, and Clarice became unemployable. No one would hire the woman who'd brought Darren Marin into their lives, who'd opened their community to his corruption. Henry should have felt satisfied. His revenge was complete, his enemies destroyed. But when he returned home, he found Valerie packing her bags. "I can't do this anymore," she said without looking at him. "Do what?" "Watch you destroy yourself. Watch you become something ugly." Henry sat on the bed, suddenly exhausted. "They betrayed me first. I know, and I understand why you wanted revenge. But this..." She gestured toward the television, which was showing footage from the country club disaster. "This isn't about justice anymore. This is about hurting people. They deserved it." "Maybe. But what about Sophie? What about your grandchild?" "Sophie made her choice. She was 20 years old, Henry. 20-year-olds make stupid choices. That doesn't mean they can't change." Valerie finished packing and stood by the door. "Marcus is my son. He's made terrible mistakes, hurt me in ways I can't even describe. But if he came to me tomorrow, if he needed help, I'd find a way to give it to him. Because that's what love means." "And what if he betrayed you again? What if helping him just enabled more bad choices?" "Then at least I'd know I tried. At least I'd know I didn't let anger make me into someone I don't recognize." After Valerie left, Henry sat alone in his house for the first time in months. The silence was complete. No traffic outside, no neighbors talking, no sounds of life anywhere around him. He walked upstairs to Sophie's old room, which he'd kept exactly as she'd left it. Her high school trophies were still on the shelves, her stuffed animals still on the bed, photos of her friends, her prom date, her acceptance letter to Butler University, all of it frozen in time, waiting for a girl who would never come home. Henry opened her closet and found the box he'd hidden there 3 years ago. Inside were copies of every video, every recording, every piece of evidence he'd gathered during his campaign of revenge. Also in the box was something else. A bank statement showing an account with Sophie's name on it, an account Henry had been secretly funding for 3 years. $250,000, more than enough to pay for the baby's surgery. The account had been his insurance policy, his way of taking care of Sophie even after she'd disowned him. Every month, he'd deposited money from his pension, from his part-time bookkeeping jobs, from the settlement he'd eventually received from the city after Darren's corruption came to light. Henry stared at the bank statement for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Sophie. She answered on the first ring. "Dad? There's an account at First National Bank under your name. The number is 471-8829-3356. The password is your birthday." Silence on the other end. "Dad, I don't understand." The baby needs surgery. The money is there. How much money? Enough? Sophie started crying again, but these tears sounded different. Why? After what I said to you, after how I treated you. Because 3 years ago, a very stupid 20-year-old girl made a very bad decision, but that doesn't mean her baby should suffer for it. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I know you are. Can I come home? Henry looked around Sophie's room, at all the memories of the daughter who used to live there, the girl who'd believed in fairy tales and happy endings, who'd thought her parents would love each other forever. The girl who lived here is gone, Henry said gently, but maybe we can figure out who you are now. 6 months later, Henry held his granddaughter for the first time. She was tiny, barely 5 pounds even after the surgery, but her heartbeat was strong and steady. Sophie had named her Grace, a word that meant forgiveness, redemption, second chances. Clarice never got to meet her granddaughter. She'd moved to Florida after the country club incident, taken a job at a resort hotel, started over with a new name and a manufactured history. She sent a card when Grace was born, but no return address. Darren Marin was extradited from Mexico 2 years later and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He'd aged badly during his time as a fugitive. His silver hair had gone gray, his confident smile had disappeared entirely. Henry went to his sentencing hearing and sat in the back row, watching the man who'd destroyed his marriage get led away in handcuffs. Valerie came back eventually. She knocked on Henry's door one evening while he was feeding Grace her bottle, her own bags packed and her eyes uncertain. I heard about the baby, she said. About what you did for Sophie. She's my daughter. It's what fathers do. I was wrong to leave. You're not the same man you were 3 years ago, but maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. Henry looked at her standing in his doorway, at Grace sleeping in his arms, at the life he'd somehow managed to rebuild from the ashes of his revenge. Are you sure? He asked. Because I'm not going to change back. I'm not going to be the man who lets people walk all over him. I don't want you to change back. I just want you to remember that some people deserve forgiveness. And some people don't. And some people don't, Valerie agreed. They remarried on Grace's first birthday, a small ceremony in Henry's backyard with Sophie as the maid of honor and Marcus, recently released from prison and genuinely trying to rebuild his life, as the best man. Judge Leo Croft, who'd lost his position but not his license, officiated the ceremony as a favor to Henry. Do you, Henry Whitlow, take Valerie to be your wife? In sickness and in health? For richer or poorer? For better or worse? Henry looked at Valerie, at Sophie holding Grace, at the small group of friends who'd stuck by him through his darkest. Period. His old life was gone, burned away by betrayal and revenge. But something new had grown in its place. Something harder but also more honest, more real. I do, Henry said. After the ceremony, Henry and Sophie walked to the garage where it had all started 3 years ago. The workbench was still there, but the tools of revenge had been replaced by baby toys and household repairs. Do you ever regret it? Sophie asked. What you did to Mom, to Darren, to all of them? Henry considered the question. In 3 years, he'd destroyed a real estate empire, ruined several marriages, ended multiple careers, and driven his own wife into exile. He'd become someone his old self wouldn't recognize. Colder, harder, more calculating. No, he said finally. They made their choices. I made mine. But you forgave me. You came back. You admitted you were wrong. You asked for forgiveness. Henry picked up a photo of Grace from the workbench. They never did. Sophie nodded slowly. What happens now? Now you raise your daughter. You build a life with Marcus if that's what you want. You make better choices than the generation before you. And you? Henry smiled. Not the cold smile that had become his trademark during the revenge years, but something warmer, more genuine. I'm going to teach my granddaughter how to change oil and balance a checkbook. I'm going to make sure she knows that actions have consequences, but also that love means giving people a chance to do better. Even when they hurt you? Especially then, but only if they earn it. That night, after the guests had gone home and the dishes were washed, Henry sat in his living room with Grace sleeping in his arms. Valerie was reading on the couch beside him. Marcus and Sophie were playing cards at the kitchen table, and the house felt full of life again. On the mantelpiece was a photo from his first wedding, him and Clarice, young and hopeful, believing their love would last forever. Next to it was a photo from that afternoon, him and Valerie, older and wiser, their eyes open to the possibility of failure, but choosing to try anyway. Henry looked at both photos and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the cold satisfaction of revenge completed, but the warm contentment of a life rebuilt on more solid foundations. He'd started as a mild accountant who let people take advantage of him. He'd become a man capable of destroying anyone who crossed him. Now, finally, he was something in between. Someone who could love deeply but wouldn't be anyone's fool. Someone who understood that forgiveness was earned, not given freely. Grace stirred in his arms, her tiny fist wrapping around his finger. She had Sophie's eyes but Marcus's stubborn chin, and when she looked at Henry, he saw no judgment in her gaze, just pure, uncomplicated love. "What are you thinking about?" Valerie asked. "Numbers," Henry said. "I've always been good with numbers." "What kind of numbers?" Henry kissed Grace's forehead and settled back into his chair. "The kind that add up to something worth keeping." Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the driveway where his old life had ended and his new one had begun. In the kitchen, Sophie and Marcus were laughing about something, their voices mixing with the wind against the windows. Henry Whitlow had learned that revenge was a dish best served cold, methodically and completely. But he'd also learned that some hungers could never be satisfied by destruction alone. Some appetites required creation, forgiveness, the careful tending of relationships that could survive betrayal and grow stronger in the aftermath. He looked at the sleeping baby in his arms, at the woman beside him, at the young couple planning their future in his kitchen. This was his final transaction. Not an exchange of pain for pain, but an investment in something that might actually last. Grace opened her eyes and looked at him with complete trust, and Henry understood that this was what winning actually looked like. Not the destruction of his enemies, but the construction of something worth protecting. He'd been good with numbers his entire life, but only now did he understand that the most important equation wasn't about profit and loss, assets and liabilities, credits and debits. It was about love given and received, trust broken and rebuilt, chances offered and chances taken. And for the first time in years, Henry's books were finally balanced.